Well, we're in our last part of our series called Back to Basics. And you don't have to say amen about that, because if you didn't feel like this, Back to Basics has gotten on a little bit long for a while. We're wrapping it up today. And we've talked about a lot of different things, a variety of things with this Back to the Basics series. We talked about the Holy Spirit, the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit. We talked about sin. We talked about the return of Christ. We talked about the Trinity. We talked about the necessity of prayer. And so we covered a whole lot of things, but we could have covered a whole lot more. And I recognize that. We could have had, a discussion, and we could have had a message about baptism. We could have had one on Holy Communion. We could have had one on the benefits of church membership, being connected to a fellowship. There's these kind of things that we could have added. But we're going to, wrap it up today. And last week, just as a quick review, we were talking about the return of Christ. And we were talking about it in the sense of that when we are fulfilling our calling, and that being the calling of the commandment, to love in a sacrificial way, and the calling of the commission to share the gospel, to point people to Jesus. When we're going about that as, the day-to-day part of our lives, as we are focused on that, if that's who we are, there can be times that we can be discouraged. And there can be times where we will be doubtful. And Jesus pointed us to a fact of something that we would run into, and generations that run into it, and that's the fact that when we think about living out the faith, we can think, well, we're living it out until Christ comes. Well, when's Christ going to come? When will he return? Because I haven't seen it happen yet, and my mom didn't see it happen yet, and my dad's mom didn't see it happen. And you can just go back and all. If you have a faithful heritage of family members in the faith, they hadn't seen it happen, and so we can be discouraged by that. And so we listen to what Jesus had to say about that kind of thing. And we looked at a parable. Anybody remember the parable? What was it? Do you remember? Right. It's kind of a set during a wedding ceremony and that whole festivities. And these bridesmaids were waiting, and they were part of it. And the parable, can anybody remember what book it's in? The Gospel of what? Matthew, yeah. The Gospel of Matthew. And so Jesus tells us this parable, and the whole point of the parable, if you read through it, is the fact that these people who were supposed to be ready for the groom to arrive, and that's clearly a Christ figure, these people, these bridesmaids, were supposed to be ready. But they were supposed to be ready and be prepared for a long delay. To be ready and be prepared for a long delay. Longer than they anticipated. Longer than they wanted. And so, this is Jesus telling his disciples to be prepared for a long delay. And so, I don't know exactly all the reasons why, but people started feeling like it wouldn't be a long delay. And early on in the church, you see Peter deal with this in one of his letters, and you see Paul deal with this in another letter, and they're confronting this, that people are saying and mocking, well, why is he not back? Where is his return? What's all this talk? Every day seems like the same old kind of day. Where's this return? And so some of them, in Peter's case, they were mocking. And with Paul in his letter to the Thessalonians, they were getting all confused about it in a couple different ways. And he had to finally tell them, he says, no, there's a timeline. And he says, first thing that has to happen is there's a falling away. And he says, and then there's a man of lawlessness who will, be on the scene. And so he kind of tells them, there's things that will happen before the return of Christ. So you shouldn't be all confused about it. There's a timeline. And so they were dealing with this issue early on, and they were confronting it in different ways. But we need to be ready, because being ready means being prepared for any delay. Being ready means being prepared for any delay. Say that with me. Being ready means being prepared for any delay. One more time. Being ready means being prepared for any delay. And that's how we have to be.
Yeah.
You know, I love the baseball analogy I'd come across, that the pitcher, if he's told at, before the game starts, buddy, you are pitching tonight, you're going to be on the mound, I promise you, we're going to have you out there. Well, if he's told to be ready, well, he doesn't just blow bubbles, in the dugout. He doesn't just watch the Jumbotron. He doesn't, just, goof off. What does he do? He's ready, whether it's the bottom of the first or the top of the ninth or whenever he's asked to be out there. To be ready. He's practicing. He's throwing pitches. He's working on different balls that he's going to throw. He's on the mound in the back. He's working at, he's being prepared. Because he knows being ready means being prepared. And that's the kind of thing we have to look at it as. So, that was last week. This week I want to ask you about something. Have you ever thought of something, and it can be in a lot of different areas of life, where you had this thought, I hope this is worth it. I'm putting some time and energy and whatever else into this. I hope this pays off. I hope this is, going to be beneficial. I hope this is going to be worth it. I hope that this is just going to work out because I'm committed to it. What area of life do people ask that kind of question? What comes to mind? Could be marriage. That you hope that what you're putting into it is going to, be the right thing. It's going to come out well. What else? Could be marriage. Oh, could be in military training. That's a good one.
School.
It's your profession.
School. Yeah, you put time and energy and money into school. You want that to pay off in a way.
Profession.
Your profession, sure. Your career. You're dedicated to that. You're putting a lot into it. You hope that, okay, I hope that everything that I'm putting into this pays off. Right? Yeah. So what we're going to look at today is that in a church/spiritual sense. Because this is how Jesus is going to talk about it. And he's going to do it because not only, with talking about last week, with being discouraged and doubtful at times, he's going to go the other direction today, and he's going to show us not that side, but actually encouraging us. So today we're going to talk about Christ's encouragement. Christ's encouragement. And so he told us, to be prepared and to expect a delay, and that's just how the timeline is going to be because, we're on his timeline, he's not on ours. And so he told us that so that we wouldn't, be doubtful and discouraged. But today we're going to look at something he told us so that we would be encouraged. He wants to build us up. He wants us to be strong in the faith. So he's telling us this today that we're going to focus on as his encouragement to us. Because this is how he's going to answer it. Because you and I want to know that our participation in the faith, in the community of God, our participation pays off. That it benefits. That there's something to it. We want to know that, okay, I'm putting a lot of time and energy and work and whatever else it might be, and, financially giving. I put all this into it. I want to know, is that going to pay off? Is that a good investment? And so Jesus is going to kind of answer that today. And so if you have your Bibles, go to the New Testament. It's going to be in the Gospel of Matthew. First book of the New Testament, Matthew. have to go very far. Just go to chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. In Matthew chapter 5 today. Christ's encouragement. Now, you might recognize this as starting off with the Sermon on the Mount. Probably the most famous sermon that Jesus ever preached. You have even non-Christians quote it. They'll, go along with parts of it because they don't know the other parts of it. It's just something that's very popularized in our culture. But in the beginning of Matthew, he starts with these things called the Beatitudes. And these are those blessed statements. And basically what he is saying is that he's describing a person's character, a disciple's character, because that's who he's talking to. And he's describing their character. And he's saying, okay, this kind of character of a disciple is blessed. That means this kind of character is flourishing. This kind of character is blessed by God. Okay? And so he starts off with this, and he goes through a whole number of them, telling them what a disciple's character should be like. Okay? And how it's blessed by God. Then he gets into something that's more kind of the most uncomfortable kind of thing. Because not only does he talk about the disciples' character and the blessings that come from it, and how that's flourishing in their life, but then he says in verse 10, so he's already given a number of them, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So now the disciples are hearing persecuted? That sounds a little different. Because, see, living the life of a disciple, and specifically these disciples he was talking to, living the life of a disciple has consequences. It has consequences. And in the real world that they will face, that's one of the consequences, that they will be persecuted. And he doesn't back down from there. He gives them a clear understanding about what's going to happen. He says in the next verse, blessed are you, just in case you didn't catch that. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. So it's going to be bad. Living the disciples' life is not easy street. Living the disciples' life is not health, wealth. It's one of persecution that will come. Now that's what's going to happen in the physical world that they live in. But then he takes a little bit of a different perspective. And look, he goes from the physical world to something beyond. He goes, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Because your day-to-day stuff is going to be a mess at times. You will be persecuted. You will be reviled. They will falsely accuse you. But you will know that great is your reward in heaven. Because they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You're in line with them. You're locking arms with them. You're part of that family. And then he gets to where we're focusing today, starting with verse 13. He goes from persecution, but rejoice, and then he says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. And he says, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And so he gives them a picture of salt. And he says, well, you're the salt of the earth. Notice this is very direct. He doesn't say, if you live a perfect life, you will be the salt of the earth. He doesn't say if you get it right every time, you're the salt of the earth. He doesn't say if you just do it continuously for years and years and years, and then you're the salt of the earth. Or he doesn't say you might be the salt of the earth. he's going to compliment them in this kind of grandiose way, he doesn't condition it. He says, you are the salt of the earth. Because salt prevents decay. That's the picture he's given them. You salt, and this is how they would have used it in that day, as a preservative for meat. Anybody ever do that or know what I'm talking about? Salt? Okay, some of y'all. All right, now, this is a great image because this is one that, was used back then and everybody understood it, but even has some, obviously some relevance for us we can pick up on. Salt of the earth prevents decay. Salt of the earth prevents decay. Now, when you salt meat, for you guys that have done that, you sprinkle a little on top and then it's good, it'll be preserved, it's fine for the winter or however long you want to keep it. No. You have to put a lot of salt, don't you? And you got to rub it in, right? You got to rub it in to get it in there for it to work. See, the world is in a state of decay. The world is facing the ill effects of sin every day. You don't have to go on the internet to know that, right? You don't have to watch the news to know that. It just blows my mind. It seems like every year I just think things are not going to get worse, at least, not for a while, but they just seem to just kind of progressively get worse. And we don't need to be surprised by that, because when there's less salt in a, Christian nation, as we have been called, there's less salt, you're going to get less decay. But when there's more salt, you can preserve it. Those ill effects of sin don't corrupt it like it would. And so he gives them this picture. He says, you guys are the salt of the earth. That means your character, which he outlined in the Beatitudes, your character has amazing consequences that you don't always see because you don't know how salt works, do you? You don't sit there and watch it preserve the meat. There's a chemical reaction going on. You don't see it. But your character has consequences in the world. It's preventing decay. Your character has consequences. Now, of course, you might recognize it as consequences, say, in your relationships, with your brother or sister, with your parents, with your spouse, at work. You'll recognize that. But Jesus is putting this on a different level. He's saying, you're the salt of the earth. Your character matters. Because he is using that in ways that you don't see or recognize to keep the society and the communities in a state of not falling apart. Your character matters. There's a guy, I don't know if y'all would still read this in high school. Do you ever read Solzhenitsyn in high school? No? He's a Russian author. We had to read him in high school. I don't know how that ended up on the list. But anyways, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was in a gulag, a prison in Russia during the communist era. And he started thinking about how he ended up there. And then he started thinking about how his society got to be that way. And he wrote a couple books about it. The Gulag Archipelago was one of them. And the one called Ivan Denisovich is another one. But he wrote about it, and he looked about all the decay that happened in the communist era in that country. Millions of people being killed. Millions of people being starved and put in prison for no reason. And the more he thought about it, those years that he was in prison, the more he came down to the fact that this wasn't happening. That the good people stopped being good. Yeah, you can blame it on somebody at the top like Stalin or Lenin, but he broke it down and he looked at every individual and himself. And he said, we stopped being good. In fact, there's a very telling line in one of his books where he says, we stopped telling the truth. How do you get a nation that murders millions of people, puts millions in prison, puts millions at the point of starvation? Somebody who lived through it. So we stopped being good. We stopped telling the truth. Your character matters. This is what Jesus is impressing on them. Because it's going to be hard to be that person who's persecuted. It's going to be hard to be that person who's mocked. It's going to be hard for that person to be falsely accused. Nobody likes any of these things. That's a hardship. But Jesus says, by you continuing to be the kind of person I've called you to be, you're helping something that beyond your knowledge. You're helping stop the decay of that society. The salt of the earth. And then he goes on. We're going to pick up on another image as an encouragement to them. And he says, you are the light of the world. Verse 14. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So he gives them another image that they'd be familiar with. You see, it runs parallel to the other one. Salt of the earth, light of the world. Because the light works against the darkness. The light works against the darkness. Notice that these images, the light on a hill, the city on a hill, that's Jerusalem, if you didn't catch the imagery. The city on the hill imagery, the light's not for the city itself. The way it's positioned in the text is that the light's actually for somebody else, so that it can't be hidden. It's for a traveler. It's for a pilgrim. It's for somebody who needs to find the light. So these things are not for us in particular. It's the effects of godly character. The light of the world is against the darkness. The light of the world is against the darkness. And that's what he's telling us. So he outlines the Beatitudes, the right kind of character. He says, that's flourishing. That's how you should be. He says, and that makes you the salt of the earth. That makes you the light of the world. And we go about our day-to-day lives thinking, well, I don't really know if I did anything, much today as far as, God's kingdom. If you're just somebody of good character, you're doing something that God can use. You may not have the opportunity to share the gospel every day. You may not have the opportunity to point people to Jesus every day. But you maintaining your character as a Christ follower is usable by God to be the salt of the earth, to be the light of the world. Your faithfulness matters. Your faithfulness matters. Say that with me. Your faithfulness matters. One more time. Your faithfulness matters. And now personalize it. Just say, my faithfulness matters. One more time. My faithfulness matters. And it matters in ways that you won't always see, that you don't always appreciate, that you don't always know is going on. But your faithfulness matters. And it matters in big ways. The world, the earth, your society, your culture, your community, your city. Your faithfulness matters. We can't check out and be like monks, although I know there's a tendency to just kind of want to hide out as Christians and just kind of divorce ourselves from society because it gets so toxic looking sometimes. It gets so dark. It looks so decayed. You know, there's injustice. There's all kinds of other problems that we deal with, and we just want to just check out. But we can't check out because we're the ones holding the decay at bay. We're the ones that are keeping the darkness at bay. We've got to live the life. Be who God called us to be. Now, I'll tell you a setting where I've kind of noticed it in a big way, and maybe you have too. You ever had a job and you notice where there's salt and light? You notice when you're at a job place, especially if you interact with a lot of people, you notice when you come across people who don't gossip. You notice when you come across people who are humble. You notice when you come across people who aren't complaining. You notice when you come across people who are encouraging, who are honest. Don't you? They stand out. Because they're being this, and they're being this. And they may not see the effects of it, and if you are that person in that workplace, you may not see the effects of it. But God is using it in ways that we don't always see and understand. But He says it's working like salt. Because that place will fall apart. Any business, any kind of workplace environment you want to think of, when there's no Christian presence and no character, it falls apart. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, I heard him say one time when he was giving advice about hiring people, and he's somebody who's hired, who knows how many people. He's a billionaire. He put integrity at the top of the list. That's character. Because even he knows from a practical business standpoint, so much hinges on it. Your faithfulness matters. Say that with me. Your faithfulness matters. And then personalize it. My faithfulness matters. That's what I want to encourage you with today. As the music plays, remember that. It's a basic thing, and that's how Christ would encourage us. Because we go through the day-to-day lives, and it may be tough, and we don't see the effects of what we're doing and how we're doing. But if we're faithful, God's using it in a good way. He's using it to bless people more than we even know. Because our faithfulness matters.